Peace be with you. It's April 16th, Thursday night in the evening, about 8 o'clock, and we're continuing with my spiritual autobiography. We're in kind of a stream of consciousness mode here. I haven't even talked about going to college yet, but I'm discussing here my father's death, which happened in 2013. As I said in the beginning, it's going to go back and forth. It's going to skip stream of consciousness. It's kind of more like a conversation than a timeline, linear timeline, boring. Then this happened, then that happened, then that happened. It's not like that. That's not what life's like. Anyway, we'll continue here. At the temple during my father's funeral service, his casket was kept in the back, in the hallway outside the main sanctuary. The family and congregation were in the sanctuary, praying and speaking kindly of him, as he so well deserved. I do not believe a Muslim is supposed to enter houses of worship where Allah and all of his prophets and messengers are not accepted. But since my father had made Shahada, the declaration of faith, that there is one God who is worthy of worship, and that the Quran and the Torah both came from the same one God, and that Muhammad and Moses, peace be upon him, were both messengers of the same one, I asked Allah to forgive me, and I entered the temple, and I said some kind words about my father. In hindsight, I should have said what I'm writing here, how he was disrespected as an elder and made to sit in the overflow annex during the high holidays. But I did not. I kept it short and sweet, just like my father was deep down inside, behind those fierce, bushy eyebrows. In Islam, the casket is placed in the front of the sanctuary, and the congregation literally prays over the dearly departed. Much more compassionate way. I have experienced a much more compassionate way Israel Pass's family, my father's family, finally made it to the front row near the Torah. But he was not there alive to join us, nor was his body even allowed to be near it, and his loved ones. Those front row seats for his family cost him his life. And for all the struggles he endured, from his father's death and throughout his whole life, he maintained his faith. He never stopped believing, although he had so many questions. He kept going to prayers with his hurt and his pain and his questions unanswered. Remember, he saw his father murdered when he was 7 years old, and he never lost faith in God, never stopped praying. Such a mensch was my father, such a decent man. By his grace, may the one God, Allah, who created the heavens and the earth, give my father, Israel Pass, light, peace, and rest in his grave, and the highest place in paradise. And may he see Allah smile on him, where money and worldly influence cannot buy a front row seat. Excuse me. When I traveled to New Jersey during the winter break 2013 after graduating from Arkansas State University, on both the Dean's List and the Chancellor's List, with a 3.5 GPA at the age of 64. No, couldn't be. No, wait a minute. I was over 60. It was 49 to 60. Yeah, 49. Anyway, 50 or 63. 64. I was 64. And I was on the Dean's List and the Chancellor's List, and I had a 3.5. I showed my father my college degree certificate, and the look on his face was priceless. He was on his deathbed. He looked so relieved and happy. He told me that when I had dropped out of college in the early 70s, like late 60s, early 70s, with one semester to go to graduate, he had sat down on the floor in the kitchen by the corded phone and cried. We both cried and laughed together. Then he said without missing a beat, "Now go back for your master's degree." I said, half joking, "What? Is all you want to do just brag about your kids to the old guys you pray with in the morning?" He looked at me sheepishly, busted, and replied unabashedly, "Yes." So in obedience to my dying father, even though I was reluctant, I went back to Arkansas to ASU and enrolled in the master's program for mass communication with a focus on documentary broadcast videography. Shortly after, I realized that a master's program is very much like that last semester in undergraduate school, where they lay the worst information down at the most vulnerable time, most invested in the system. And if someone wants a degree, the status, the money, the job, the spouse, the house, the car, the 2.3 kids, the whole American dream, one had to often put aside personal values and ethics and play the game. George Carlin was right. In order to experience the American dream, one must be asleep. I saw it coming early on in my first few classes. I knew it in my gut that I could not and would not go do it. There was a required reading book, a bestseller, and its premise was not crisis management, but rather management by crisis. The dominant order would covertly create a crisis, then overtly come to the rescue and fix it, while the unassuming public had no idea of the massive global scam that was and is being perpetrated using this technique of false flags and the like. It was then that I became more aware of the Tavistock Institute, the London-based think tank of mind-benders and manipulators, whose guru was Sigmund Freud, whose nephew was Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, or how to lie and propagandize legally in business. These men wielded so much power in the world of men that if Freud or any of his disciples deemed someone mentally unfit, that was the end of their career, perhaps their marriage, friendships, social standing, and general existence in the society as a valued member. Note, one of the primary Zionist rebuttals to their critics is calling into question the critic's mental state, something straight out of Freud, no coincidence. Which one came first, I do not know for sure. Perhaps they came together. The Tavistock Institute had orchestrated the 1960s in America, what we all thought at the time was a spontaneous love fest of peace, understanding, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, only to find decades later that it was all a setup designed to sideline the best and brightest of that generation, while the globalists were laying the foundation for what we are seeing ramp up today, the movement towards a one-world government and religion. This is where the rubber met the road, where my linear search for truth in human events morphed into a spatial search for truth, including the spiritual realm, as well as the socio-political one. As in all things, no matter how evil a plan, some good comes from it, and vice versa. So even though the 60s were not what we thought they were by design, much good came from that era anyway. I was blessed to have experienced what I believe was the best of that time. Now the idea of appearance versus reality became more of a for keeps issue, not just cosmetic or superficial, and I was more than ever invested in my search for the truth and my place and purpose in this life. My father had told other family members and friends that I had been in his room visiting with him a few days before my arrival in New Jersey in March of 2013, a few days before he died. In other words, my father was telling other members of the family that I was in the room visiting with him and we were laughing and joking and having a good old time. I wasn't there. I hadn't arrived until the next day. I did not know about this, only that Allah does how Allah does. This was right about the time I was fed up with seeking a master's degree, but I did not tell him. So my father and I had a roaring good time the night before I got there. It's like, okay. It's 9 minutes. I'm going to break and to be continued.